you may know already Business Disability Forum, and if you don't, feel free to reach out to us. Business Disability Forum is a non-for-profit organization. We've been around for about 30 years and helping businesses as well as higher education institutions, making it more rewarding and to do business and employ disabled people. Now, there are about 300 organizations that are members of Business Disability Forum, and altogether they represent about 15% of the UK workforce, and nowadays 8 million people worldwide. So why talking about higher education stuff now? So when we talk about universities, we often think, universities are there to teach students, and you've got a research element. That's possibly the first image that comes into mind when we talk about higher education. Now, the thing is, obviously, you need staff to run an institution like this. And looking at the UK population, 90% of working age adults are disabled. And there are almost 500,000 people working in higher education sector across 170 institutions. That's basically split between 49% of academics and 51% of non-academics, so roughly equal in terms of the academic gap, really. Now, often we will also say that people tend to acquire disability through age, and mostly through age. So you also looking at the statistics around that actually about 16% of non-academic and 90% of academics are aged 56 years old and over. So it's important to remember that when we talk about disability long-term condition. And now, also, why talking about academics? Well, when we look at the figures here that are shown on your screen, there are 5% of non-academics and 4% of academics that have shared that they have a disability, long-term condition, or are neurodivergent. Now, that's roughly comparable to what we see in the private sector in terms of what often is called disclosure rate. But now, if we compare that to in the same institution, often we'll see about 12% of students sharing that they have a disability, which is a quite important gap to observe in the same institution, really. And if we look at academics, 4% only have disclosed or have shared they have a disability, and however, 8% of research postgraduates and 9% of taught postgraduates have a disability themselves. So where have these students gone? So I think that's why it's important to talk about students and staff, but today we're going to focus on staff. So I think it's important to first, before we talk about good practices and before you all can go back to your institutions with loads of great ideas from what our speakers and their institutions are doing, as well as some guest institutions are doing, I think it's important to have a chat about the challenges that people are facing in higher education. Now, some of you may be familiar with Business Disability Forum and our disability standard, and there's more information about it on our website. Well, institutions like businesses tend to face difficulties and challenges in many areas, and these can be summed up by the areas of our disability standard, actually. So whether it's commitment, learning development, so know-how, adjustments, whether they offer adjustments policies or not, recruiting and retaining disabled people, so, the suppliers and partners they work with, how do they communicate about what they're doing around disability, how accessible the premises are, and how accessible their IT is. Now, for products and services, which I haven't mentioned, this for higher education would be the support offered to students. So we won't mention that today. Corina, do you want to talk to us about the challenges faced by a higher education institution at the OU?
Yes, sure. So when I put together some points about challenges that can be faced both by organisations and employees, it isn't just about the OU, it's about other organisations that I've worked for, but most of them being within the education sector. So for organisations, some of the issues that are faced are predominantly things like not having staff in place on site who have the relevant knowledge and expertise to support staff, line managers, HR departments, So when you have a member of staff with a disability and they don't know who to go to, or they don't know who to speak to, or they do speak to somebody and they don't know who to direct them to or how to support them, that is actually quite a huge issue, and it can be, particularly for the individual, quite a stressful situation. Another issue that we have found is that people can work in silos. So what I mean by that is that there is a risk of discrimination. So if you have a large organisation, maybe split across different buildings, different units, different sites, you may have pockets of units doing one thing and pockets of units doing another thing, and that has a risk of discrimination in that some people may be treated more favourably than others, which is clearly not acceptable under the Equality Act 2010. Some of the other organisational issues are cost. So the cost of providing adjustments. Large employers will be expected to pay the first £1,000 from any access to work interaction. Not only that, is that you may use other experts such as the RNIB, and they could cost between £850 to £1,000 just to do the assessment, and then you'll have the adjustments on top of that. Not having the right processes in place, policies can be too complex, they can be too difficult to understand for individuals, and that can also deter people and put them off from even asking for help in the first place. Medical professional advice, so we do have some issues with occupational and health referrals that then ask us to give reasonable adjustments but don't actually give the detail of those adjustments, so that can be quite difficult for line managers who have no experience in this area to be able to implement those adjustments for the individual. For the actual individual themselves, some of the issues are things like the line manager isn't trained, so they don't have any confidence, they don't have any understanding of what their staff are trying to speak to them about. There's a lack of awareness of disabilities within the organisations, particularly hidden disabilities and mental health disabilities, so that, you know, if you say to somebody walking around the site, give me a disability, then the likelihood is that they'll say to you somebody in a wheelchair or somebody who's mobility impaired, not somebody who might have depression or cognitive disability or mental health. And that's something that we really need to change to make sure that everybody, when they think of disability, think about the whole overarching word and what that can mean. Misunderstandings of what a disability is and also what reasonable adjustments a person may need. So when you see somebody in a wheelchair, you might think, I know what they need, when actually you probably don't know what they need, but they know what they need. So what's really important is that you speak to the person and you don't make assumptions about what they may need themselves. Organisational change, so, you know, there are periods of time when an organisation will go through a period of huge change. You may find that somebody's changed a line manager 2 or 3 times in that period of change. If the information is not passed on between line managers, then the individual will have to repeat and go over their issues time and time again, and that isn't something they should be doing. They should be able to have a consistent approach, and the adjustments should just follow them as to wherever they will go. Particularly in the higher education sector, we've got remote working, lone working, working in labs, high-risk environments, field work, travel, conferences, ceremonies, use of external venues for tutorials is what we use here at the Open University, because most of our tutors are actually associate lecturers and they're therefore not based on site. Using personal IT has been an issue for us, for some people to be able to give them assistive technology because it hasn't worked on their own personal IT. There are ways and means around that, of course, and policies and procedures just not being flexible enough. And finally, there is an access to work, social and domestic contribution element that people are not always fully aware of. So that's really for remote people, people who work from home, who need reasonable adjustments at home. They may be expected to pay a contribution, or at least asked to pay a contribution by access to work, which is not well known, is what we're finding at the moment. Thank you.
Hello, I can't hear you, Delphine. Oh,
Yeah,
Delphine,
I
hello.
muted
Did you just say?
So yeah, Corina, what you're saying makes absolute sense, really, and that's what we see across businesses. Actually, it's very similar, and particularly, you know, it's very interesting to hear about the organizational changes. So how is it for you at the University of Cambridge, Miriam?
Well, I think Corina's just really highlighted many of the similar issues that we face here in terms of the challenges. I think we also here at Cambridge have huge challenges in terms of visibility and commitment. So something that we've worked very hard to achieve is senior level commitment to enabling the University of Cambridge to be seen and to be truly an inclusive environment for all staff members, including disabled staff. And because academia is notoriously known for being competitive for both academics and here within Cambridge also in terms of professional staff, I think it's a real challenge to look at how can we ensure that the support is there. And I think this is a key area why we have many more students sharing the fact that they are disabled versus staff members, because actually there are ways and means that we are much better at being able to support our students here at Cambridge. And I'd be interested to know if that's across the sector, that there's more ability to financially and support and put adjustments in place. And the issue around adjustments for staff is something that many managers feel very uncomfortable and aware and not sure what their role is. So there's a huge issue in terms of promotion of how adjustments are made, but also in terms of communicating a culture where we can discuss disability without it being seen as particularly as a charitable model of pity and of fear in terms of what this will mean for budget. So I think that's one of the major issues and challenges for us, as well as the fact that we're working in an environment with premises of huge obstacles for people to see how we can make accessible. So it's another kind of case in point of actually communicating how we can make changes that enhance the environment for all our users here. So I think recruitment is also another big issue here in terms of the University of Cambridge, of how do we truly enable people to see that it would be possible to work here, and it is possible to work here with a disability. And that's something that we're working very hard to look at in terms of our recruitment guidance, in terms of our promotion material and our further particulars, to actually changing the kind of the language and the value base of our, to be fully supportive and fully inclusive, as opposed to, tell us at a particular point when it suits you. So we want to change the whole culture so that people feel that that this is a place that's a welcome environment to be at. So that's another big challenge for us. So the kind of through the whole employee life cycle, there are challenges along the way. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's very similar to what we hear from organizations that are not higher education institutions. Anything around recruitment, around line managers, there particularly, that's something we hear very often. How talking to your own line manager, training your line managers. It's something very common. Now, of course, we've talked about kind of some of the challenges, but what will interest some of our, and hopefully all of our audience, all of the people attending today, will be around the good practices and the examples that we can learn from one another. Because it's very important to really share what everybody is doing. And you've mentioned competition and competitivity, Miriam. I think actually disability is an area where we ought not to have that competition. This is not about who's going to be best at providing support, but how can we all be better at providing support to all staff and students, of course, but how can we support them all? And sharing good practice is the first step to improve that, really. So we're going to talk about the good practices example from different institutions. So first we'll start with the Open University, and Corina will talk to us about what is being done at the Open University. Then Miriam, if you can talk to us about the University of Cambridge, and also I'll have some good example from the Manchester Metropolitan University. So Corina, if you want to.
Yes, sure. So as you can see, the Open University's mission is to be open to people, places, methods and ideas. We do have the largest amount of students with disabilities across Europe. And we've recently, well, I say recently, 2016, we achieved Bronze Award with the Business Disability Forum for the Disability Standard, which enabled us, and I think this reflects what Miriam was saying earlier, that to identify that we are really, really good at supporting our students, but perhaps there are some areas that need improvement for supporting our staff. However, we do quite a lot, as I hope that you will see now as I'm going to move forward. We use Access to Work for a number of assessments for members of staff, but we also use other specialists because we find that Access to Work are not always the most specialist in the area that the person needs. So we can pull on other companies that you can see that I've listed below. That obviously that list is not exhausted. There are hundreds of companies that can support you. We have found that multiple employers, you may need to duplicate what your employer has been, the other employer has given a member of staff, and Access to Work will expect you to pay for a number of items as standard, such as keyboard, mice, laptop. And again, I go back to the social and domestic contribution. It's really important if you have people who work from home or anywhere else that they may benefit in the eyes of Access to Work. If something's in the home, they believe that that could be benefited from during the weekend, for example, whether you as an organisation expect your member of staff to use it in the weekend. And that could be quite a significant amount. So, for example, we've had one case here where the total cost of adjustments was £7,500 and the employee was asked to contribute £2,000, which is a significant amount of money for anybody, for any individual.
Yeah.
Estates, we do a lot of work in estates, so we access audit our buildings. That's done at regular intervals. We have a disability log, which wherever any inquiries come through, it may be about automating the door, it may be about the dog run for the assisted dogs, it may be about putting in adjustments. So we have had a member of staff who needed something to hold on to as he moved from his wheelchair to another area, and our estates team built that for him specifically. We have just recently put together a PowerPoint that staff can refer to know how to react if the alarm cord is pulled in an accessible toilet, which is well needed because we did an audit and went round all the toilets. As you can imagine, that was a fun day for us all. Activated the cords in all the toilets, and only one toilet had somebody come and respond and say, do you need any assistance?
Oh.
So I would recommend, if you have them, that you try that, because it's very interesting to watch people walk past them and to just ignore them or pretend that they can't really hear that ringing and the flashing light that's in the corridor. So
I think that's very common to a lot of institutions. I do remember working for some universities here in the UK and abroad, and it's definitely like this has never been used. So people, change roles, and it's definitely a good point to make.
Yeah, so that's quite a successful movement forward, and hopefully that will educate people how to react if something really did happen where somebody needed assistance. We have a system in place for allocating parking spaces for anybody who has a reasonable adjustment. We provide office chairs, special ergonomic office chairs, to any staff that have reasonable adjustment requirements, in addition to where people, for example, like I've listed, have a wheelchair and they would still like to use an office chair. We've managed to provide office chairs with the brake function so that they're able to move, transfer safely and continue to use an office chair as long as they want to, because they don't want to stay in their wheelchair, which is fully understandable. We have a full PEEP system in place, so we personal emergency evacuation plans, for those who don't know what they are, which assist people in evacuating the building in an emergency. And well, I've already said about the chairs, but I can tell you now that the cost that we spend on those chairs are between 45 to 55,000 a year on the ergonomic chairs.
Yeah, and I think that they are quite expensive, but they're very useful and very comfortable to prevent any further damage to or pain and aches that individuals could experience, really.
Yeah, so it's all positive what we're doing and trying to help.
Exactly.
In terms of HR have put together a disability awareness resource pack, which goes hand in hand with a reasonable adjustment support plan, which then enables line managers to document the person's disability or anything that they may require as a reasonable adjustment. That has been really quite supportive for individuals, because then it is a live document which then can transfer with them between line managers if they have a change of line manager. And it's also just something that you can review with your member of staff on a regular basis to check that the adjustments that you've put in place are still working or whether they need to be altered in any way. So that's been a really now that people are becoming more aware of it, it's become a much more successful process.
Could you actually tell us a little bit more about how you communicate about that plan, and how are people aware that it exists within the organization? Because I think a lot of organizations across the country find that although they may have a policy in place, they might not have a process to start with, but also when they have a process in place, people might not be aware of it. So how did you work?
So at the moment, it's currently on the HR intranet, and when it first went on, it was everybody was sent a message about where to find it. My team are particularly vocal in telling anybody whenever they ask for any piece of equipment that we say is a reasonable adjustment, about directing people to that, because you need to let people know. So in addition, if they ask for a personal emergency evacuation plan, we'll say, have you got a reasonable adjustment support plan? Do you need one? And they'll probably look at you a bit blankly at first, but then you show them where it is, and that message is beginning to get round. We've also got a transformation at the moment in HR, which is going to mean that people will go to a central point moving forward, where they will contact anybody in HR and they will be able to direct people. So it's a movement towards the information being there, and the right people knowing where it is, and advertising it and let people know where it is.
Fantastic.
Mental health, obviously, as you're all probably aware, mental health is the big talking subject of health and safety at the moment. Mentioned in the budget, the government have got a big, strong movement towards every employer having a mental health first aider or advisor within their organisation. We've currently been providing training by Mind and the British Safety Council, who do 2 sessions, start the conversation and manage the conversation. And that's really about getting to talk to people about mental health, and if people look like they're not themselves, to be able to have the confidence to approach them and speak to them and see how they're really feeling, and see if you can get something out of that. We've also recently just established a working group which has a wide range of staff on it, ranging from home workers, associate lecturers, myself, people in HR, and we are looking at identifying a mental health policy, which will then it's going to be championed by our Vice Chancellor, and is going to be something that's going to really move the mental health process forward at the Open University, to the point where we're likely to train around 130 people as an initial starter across our site here in Milton Keynes, but also across our regions and nations, because we are spread across the United Kingdom and Ireland. And that's going to enable all of our centres to have people who are trained in recognising the symptoms and being there as signposters and somebody to go to if you need the first initial support. And of course, we've got an employee assistance programme, which then supports the next level, and line manager training, which is something that I'll come to at the end for our other initiatives. And we've also got suicide awareness training for frontline staff, which is, it has been needed. So it's a real issue out there that people should be thinking about supporting.
Definitely.
Here
we go.
Deja vu then. Homework and assessment. So what we do is we actually are probably a little bit more unique in the sense that we have half of our staffing numbers actually are not based at a region or our main centre here in Milton Keynes. We have 4,500 or slightly more associate lecturers who work from home predominantly, but also work doing tutorials at external venues. So for those people where they do their DSE, their display screen equipment assessment, they will do that as well as a homework and self-assessment form. And where we've identified that people have reasonable adjustment requirements, we then have an external provider who goes to the home, wherever that may be, and that includes in rural Ireland, which has been a bit of a struggle to get somebody, but there are people out there. They then go out to the homes, they talk to the people, they get an overview of what the disability is, and then they send us a report giving recommendations as to what that person needs in their home. Sometimes it raises more issues than we thought we had originally. So some people might have an open, they find that perhaps that not speaking to their line manager or somebody else, they might bring more information forward. So we sometimes have more to manage when the report comes back. But ultimately, it's a really good programme because it supports people at home and it gives them what we would do for site-based staff. We do go to their desk, we do send somebody from an occupational health background to go and speak to them, so we're duplicating that for people in their homes. I have listed there that there are some potential supplier issues for outside of mainland UK. We have had a few issues for, the Isle of Skye and Republic of Ireland, like rural, right on the outskirts on the Atlantic way. But we're getting there, and there's some good suppliers out there who do a really good job in supporting us for that.
That's great to see.
And finally, other successful OU initiatives. As I said earlier, we've achieved the Bronze Award in the Business Disability Forum standard. So that's been really, really good, because it's enabled us to identify the strong points, the weaker points, and the bits in the middle that need a bit of tweaking, but actually we're moving in the right way forward. We have a VC disability champion who is currently our Vice Chancellor, which makes a huge difference. People really buy into these kind of things. When the Vice Chancellor is singing off the same song sheet that we're singing from, then it has a massive impact, and it's a really positive thing. We have research in animal-computer interaction. So what they did was they created coloured buttons that assistance dogs understand what the different coloured buttons are. So yellow might turn a light on, blue might open a door, and they activate the buttons by their noses. So they jump up and hit the buttons with their noses, and that does things for people who need the assistance dogs. And we've actually used that on site for a research student who had multiple sclerosis and a very poor manual dexterity. We have a dog run for assistance dogs, which people quite like looking at. They quite find it quite entertaining watching the assistance dogs doing their thing. We also allow staff to bring dogs on site, assistance dogs that are in training, or puppies, so that they can socialise and experience the being at work syndrome for when they do go to an actual person to live with. We have working groups. We have a disability confident online training module that's just being done now, so that's going to be accessible for staff. So that would be a really good tool for line managers to get some understanding of the different disabilities and how you approach those and manage those. We've had organisational audits, including from Action on Hearing Loss. We have 3 wellbeing days a week, and the last one was on the 10th of October, which was World Mental Health Day, and was very much focused on mental health, which was really successful. We have an enabling staff network group, which is again formed by a number of staff, including myself, and that enables us to look at all the different areas that disabled staff would like us to look at, and we can feed into policy and things moving forward. We can feed into the Vice Chancellor if we think there's something that we need to feed upwards. And the people services transformation, and this again reflects what Miriam was saying. Part of that transformation is about recruitment and retention, and they're making some really big strides moving forward about how to improve those, and it's all going to be very much centralised, so things don't get lost going across different units and multiple people. It's going to keep it really really good, and hopefully make people feel that from the minute they step through the door for their interview, or even actually beforehand when they're going through the application process, that they feel that we want them to work here, and we do want them to work here, and we will support them while they work here, and we will try to keep them to work here as long as they want to.
Thank you for that, Corina. I think, again, very good points. The senior sponsorship, as you mentioned, with your VC being your disability champion, is very important for any organization. If you're trying to move things forward, if it comes from the top, it can help moving things forward a bit quicker. And glad to hear that you can enjoy some puppy days at the OU and on campus. I think some universities have actually, for students often, and staff would definitely enjoy that, around having days where they would invite some organizations to bring in puppies. Assistant dogs, not necessarily and such, so it's interesting to see that, but to help with like relaxing potentially before exams, they would tend to do that, and everybody on campus would benefit from that, really. So it's good to see organizations and institutions doing that. Miriam, did you want to talk to us a little bit more about the University of Cambridge and the support you offer there?
Excellent, thank you, Delphine. Wow, Corina, you're doing such a lot at the OU. It's brilliant. I'd also want to start by saying that actually what's really important for us is a senior buy-in. So something that we've had for a number of years is a champion, so a senior academic champion, who will speak for disability and wellbeing across the university, and will make it known at many, many different events of the importance of being able to talk about these issues. Because one of the things, as I mentioned at the start, that we knew that we had a very, very low, much lower than the HESA national average for both academic and professional staff, of people sharing the fact that they were disabled. And one of the things that we wanted to do was actually try and work out why this is the case. So we wanted to do a cultural piece around discussing with people, either disabled people who were out or not out, about what the reasons were. And obviously we didn't want to be heavy-handed and say, actually there's, there are benefits. Well, this is what we do want to say, is there are benefits, or what we perceive there to be benefits in terms of support. But unless we have the support packages in place, then staff aren't going to be able to, or want to, there is no incentive for them to disclose the fact that they are disabled. Because I think it's really important that we look at those figures, and I think it was 5% of academic and 4%, Delphine, of of professional staff. Yeah. We know that that's not a true picture. Yeah. Just mean the reason, we know that actually there are many, many more people who are either not getting the support they need, or not feeling that they're able to literally come out and tell us of their status if they need to, or if they want to. So we have a very senior champion within the university who sits on our Equality and Diversity Governance Committee for the university. So it's also important that that champion, has weight to make changes within the university and to feed into policy and process within the university. We also, we very much wanted to train and support wellbeing and disability advocates within departments, within faculties and departments within the university. And that's been an initiative that we've started over the last, this is now a second year of having wellbeing advocates based at departmental level. We have a managerial advocate and a non-manager advocate, and they take real kind of devolved responsibility for looking at wellbeing and disability issues within individual departments, which is a process that's working really well. Each of those advocates are trained in mental health light training. We haven't trained them in terms of the full 2-day first aid training, but we offer a 4-hour mental health light training that's delivered by Mind, which has been really, really successful. And we run a 2-week festival of wellbeing every year, and that's something that's built up over the last 5 years. That started as a one-day festival and is now become a 2-week festival within the year. And as a result of that, what people were telling us is that we need events happening throughout the year. That actually having a dedicated 2-week period wasn't inclusive enough and wasn't broad enough in terms of events that were happening. So we now run what we call Wellcam events and initiatives throughout the whole year. So we're looking specifically this year, we're looking at work-life balance and stress and the impact on mental health issues for all staff within the university. And we work very closely with our university counselling service in order to deliver real practical solutions for overcoming stress within the workplace. In saying that, we're also incredibly aware of line management responsibility in order to promote a culture where people can be included and inclusive of any protected characteristic, but particularly looking at disability issues here. So we're looking at developing line management training, which is modern and fit for purpose for a 21st century higher education provider. And one of the key issues that I think impacts throughout the employee life cycle is looking at bias. So in some of our unconscious implicit bias work that we're doing, we're definitely interested in and talk around disability and what bias people have towards disabled people, because it all fits part of the cultural package of why people aren't able to be themselves at work. Because we know the more authentic people are at work to their true identity, then the more people can be more productive, but also feel that they belong here. And that's about how do we retain our disabled staff within the university, a key issue that we're keen to look at So we too have a working group, and this is our second year of being Business Disability Forum members, which we're really proud of, actually, and something that, that is a step in the right direction to be able to discuss disability as an issue for the university. And one of the things that we're doing is working through the standard. We are absolutely aware of all the charter awards that we're working towards, and we're keen to see that the disability standard, that we don't treat it in a similar way to to one of the other equality charter marks. But and one of the key good practice things that we're doing is actually taking one step at a time, rather than seeing the whole thing as a massive piece of work that we need to solve overnight. So we're being bite-sized in our ways of tackling, and we're looking at recruitment first. So the other thing that we're developing is bystander training to support people to actually change culture in a way that we can all speak out and tackle disability harassment where we see it, so that actually acknowledging the fact that we are a university that wants to enable staff members to actually speak out and create a culture which actually calls out harassment as and when it happens, or in a safe and supported way. So alongside with that, we have joined the Equality Diversity team, have joined with our occupational health team to deliver training looking at supporting disabled staff within the university. So we're really combining occupational health reasonable adjustments programme of looking at unpicking that alongside really challenging people to think of the social model of disability, for some people for the very first time, to actually open their eyes in terms of actually that this is a process that we can all be engaged with, which will make the university a better place for everyone if we can sort out access issues and if we can make it a truly inclusive environment. So that's a kind of a broad sweeping statement of kind of how cultural change, some direct projects and initiatives that we're embarking on and monitoring and looking at whether it's making a difference. And our disclosure, our sharing of rates of disability have increased over the last year. So much so that HESA have actually contacted us and said, oh, what's happened? You know, what's occurring here? Your figures have gone up. I mean, not radically, but they have gone up to an extent that they were actually, challenging us to say, is this real, or has, what measures have you put in place? So it is about a cultural change initiative that we're embedding alongside other protected characteristics to bring about change. So there we go.
Before I move on to talking about more of other examples, my colleague has been sharing some of the questions, and although I've been seeing them all, I might answer some of them later on or separately from the webinar. But there is one asking you, Corina, to provide some more information about the Wellbeing Days. Is that something you could do?
Yeah, sure. So we have 3 a year. We've only just started this year. So the things that have been covered so far are things like how to relax, resilience training. So for people at home, so the last session that we had was actually for people logging in from home and about how they can remain resilient when they're working remotely, because obviously isolation has been highlighted as one of the bigger issues for home workers. We do things like origami for relaxation, yoga, massage. The next one that we're going to focus on is more, well, we hope that we're thinking about doing more physically based issues. So heart conditions is one that we're looking at next year, because having been somebody who's been told about cholesterol levels being too high, it can be quite a shock, and to be able to deal with that, and it could be that people have got longer term heart conditions where they really have to look after themselves. So we have defibrillators on site, and we've done that. We've done all of the launching for that. So we did that on a Wellbeing Day as well, about launching about heart health. So it's various different areas, but what we do is we ask people, what do they want us to cover? What would you like to see at the next Wellbeing Day? Because we have to cater for a large number of staff. They're not all based here, so we can't just do something in a room that everybody comes along to. So it's really about asking people, what do they want? What are our topics of the day at work at the moment? So obviously mental health is a big one, but there'll be stress awareness, and then physical health. Hidden disabilities is definitely one I think that needs to be addressed in the future. And that's really what we do. We just kind of react to what the people ask for and require, and we do what we can to do a different approach. So some of it's fun, but some of it obviously is quite serious. So it's just about finding a nice balance and really focusing in on that day about this is about you being well at work, and we really hope, we want you to be. It's, you know, it's important.
And I've got another one for you, Miriam. I hope you will be able to answer. If not, just let us know. Can you share with us what's the disability disclosure rate at Cambridge?
Can I share it? Well, it was 1.9%.
Mm-hmm.
So there, yeah. So I think that was, and I don't know. I don't know. I can't disclose the latest what it was, but it was as low as 1.9%, which is shocking.
Okay.
Yeah, and not good enough. So that's one of the reasons why the work that we're doing is probably a longer term piece of work, but one that we're very committed to sort of changing the culture around, rather than trying to do a massive campaign looking at how do we increase the disclosure rates. We're kind of linking it to the fact that if we bring about a cultural change program, then people will feel safer to be able to tell us about it. So that's the kind of the approach that we're taking.
Definitely. So what I'll do now is I'll have I'll share some information and good practice from another university that you may be familiar with, Manchester Metropolitan University. So Manchester Metropolitan University obtained the gold when they submitted their disability standard evaluation. So that was in 2017, and they've got really good practices that are very interesting. The three of them that they've wanted to share with us, and I've put the links there so that everybody can get more information about them. So the Access for All web pages, so they've got kind of dedicated web pages for all staff, students and visitors to review accessibility of all their campus buildings. So you can check routes and to their campuses, and having panoramic views of certain entrances. You can explore each floor. So I think that's very interesting to see how that can support and help staff around mobility, but also preparing your route and to access, and making sure you prepare yourself before going somewhere. So another one is the access guides. So and again, do check them. So that's for conferences and events. So they have like they work hard to embed equality and fairness into everything they do. That's really one of the things that came across when we had a look at their submission, and they want to make sure that they provide accessible venues and that there is accessible parking close to their buildings. So there's a variety of catering options available for all visitors with potentially specific dietary requirements that could be linked to a medical condition, and recognizing that people may have allergies. So they also offer allergy accreditation certification. So they also have that, sorry. So they have also hearing loop facilities in many of their lecture theatres, have accessible bedrooms in their residences, and have overnight provision with a range of access options. So they really want to offer an inclusive experience to everybody, and trying to carry out reviews and risk assessments to ensure they maintain high standards. So they have a conference and events team, and they designed a range of access guides, and these are the ones there. So that's for the main event spaces and accommodation. So that covers accessible information to anticipate what visitors may need, such as hearing loop, dietary requirements, toilet facilities, etc. And the last one is the disabled role model profiles. I think Miriam, you mentioned about that, about advocates, at least in your case. But they, at Manchester Metropolitan University, you have a what they call equality and diversity role models. Mm-hmm. So it's a series profiling disabled staff members on their website, Man Met Life, and it was introduced in time for the International Day of People of Disabled People. So definitely not this upcoming one, but previously, and to highlight the fact that they are having what are people's needs to, and their needs are not a barrier to thrive at Manchester Met. So they encouraged other disabled staff to inform their line manager so that they could feel supported and that talents would not go to waste. So that would ensure that disabled staff will be more motivated, efficient, and confident in workplace where they were able to feel supported with their disability. So they have very good practices, and these are only 3 of them. So definitely do check them out there. Additionally to that, I think you mentioned, Corina, something around mental health support particularly. I do remember from one university, just before the questions, from one university that we had, where I had, so the disability team that's itself, the team that is in charge of disabled students often do come across, whether it's mental health or disability long-term condition, they do come across quite sometimes difficult cases, and in a way that when you see nurses and doctors and ambulances and getting support around their mental health and how do they cope and around resilience, actually offering specific mental health support, and it was called supervision. So it was with a so I think it was a psychologist, but they would offer support for these teams every 2 weeks to have either a group session or an individual session to allow staff to really talk about these cases and making sure they would not take it home with them. And I thought that was always a very interesting approach that ought to be shared more broadly. So here it is.
Yes, definitely, because we've identified in the working group for staff support is that what we will have to do is have a support function for those people who operate as mental health champions or mental health first aiders, because they may well be the people dealing with the immediate issues and they need to be supported too. So that's, there's going to be an element of group support, and that's why we needed to have a number in the group so that they can support each other.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is important to see for those teams that sometimes have a lot of students to support on a day-to-day basis, and sometimes a lot to take home, really. And we don't want them to take that home, really, with them. So now we're arriving at the questions and finally the correct slide. And I've got quite a few questions, so I'll kind of cherry pick depending. Mona, actually, from Manchester Met, wanted to make a comment, which I haven't said. They also have 35 equality and diversity champions at grassroots level. So it's another one to share, which is great to see. So I've got one for you, Corina.
Okay.
A common request is for in-house dyslexia assessments or providing services asking disability for students, really. Have your adjustment process addressed requests like this, if it has?
Do we mean for staff?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if we have a member of staff who needs a dyslexia assessment, we go to the British Dyslexia Association. They have people that can do it. If they can't do it, we'll find somebody else, an external organisation, to come in. So basically, where we don't have it in-house, we will find it, and most of these things we don't. For staff, for students, there's a different approach. We will find it elsewhere externally and we'll address it that way.
And is that paid by the Open University?
Yes,
then?
yes, of course, yeah.
Do you encourage people to do like a screening, online screening, before putting that process in place, or do you just, as soon as they've got concern, you send them to the British Dyslexia Association?
Where there's a screen, it's not really a screening, so I think it's a conversation with the individual. Yeah. Most people with dyslexia will say, I have dyslexia, and we will say, this is what we're going to do, we're going to help you. We don't, there's no middle ground. Obviously, if they need the support, then we'll go and get them the support.
I've got another one, also I think for both of you, around disability training. Is it mandatory in your organisation, and what has feedback been like?
At the Open University, we haven't launched it yet, so there is no feedback. But the actual course itself is a fairly comprehensive online module which looks at the different types of disabilities and how you can, the do's and don'ts, the common errors that people make when helping a disabled person, and then about how to support them in the workplace and any in-house procedures, and also reference about access to work and how to seek further assistance, because that's something that still is potentially not known across the board. So we're using this module to try and advertise what we already have in-house and how people can seek extra support once they've exhausted the initial avenues that they've got.
Sure. Miriam, what about yourself?
So very little is mandatory here. However, we have included, and we do include disability issues within our online sort of equality and diversity essentials training, which, there's a strong expectation for all staff to complete, and we have over 80% completion of that online training at the university at the moment. So that's really important. In terms of the face-to-face training that we've piloted one, and we're about to set a date for the next session, but it's really tricky in terms of getting 12,500 staff through face-to-face training. So it's a real dilemma, because I think what we know is face-to-face work needs to be really, advocated as the best possible training for staff. So that's where we're trying to embed in leadership training, in management training, as well as our implicit bias training, so we're trying to include it within other training, embedding it, and within the active bystander training.
And somebody asked also whether for both organizations, although you haven't rolled it out, Corina, is it developed in-house?
Our training is developed in-house, yeah, definitely.
Okay. What about yourself, Corina?
Yeah, I think the one that's being used at the Open University was initially taken from elsewhere, but it's been batted to and from, and it's been very much made more site specific. And there've been a number of people engaged in the consultation of the process. So, we've all been asked to give feedback, and it's come back 2 or 3 times. So it's become more and more of an in-house product as the process has gone on. And just to add to what Miriam was saying there earlier, we also have as part of the induction that people are expected to engage in some equality type induction training, if you like, which is an expectation of all staff to complete. So that's another positive.
I've got another question around, we've talked about disability non-disclosure has been cited as an issue. Has there been any work to understand in your organizations to understand the dynamic around this, whether the prevalence, the cause, interventions, at least I'll be able to answer separately from a general overview, but in-house and for your organizations, any?
Can I get, yes, so, because I need to leave imminently, yes. So, but we're aware of stigma as being one of the most potential reasons why people don't want to share information. So I think that's probably the one that we're working with most. I think that's the biggest issue for us as an organisation in terms of other colleagues or in terms of managers, and how staff feel that they would be curtailed opportunities if they were to disclose, or that they wouldn't be a level playing field, and that they would be constantly looked at differently. So I think there's a real issue in terms of confidence for our managers to basically know their stuff, and to be able to truly provide an inclusive environment.
Definitely. So I know you've got to kind of bounce. Thank you
Thank you so much
for going, and for the good quality of
Thank you, BDF. Bye, Corina.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
So we're still remaining live with Corina, and I've got. So yeah, did you want to talk about the disclosure rates?
I don't know what it is here, if I'm honest. It's
yeah.
not something that I would be directly involved with. I have, however, been involved with associate lecturer work in particular, because we were unaware at one point of how many associate lecturers had disabilities and how many may need support in venues, in particular for doing tutorials. So what happened there was Academic Services sent out an email to all associate lecturers, a communication to them all, explaining to them, that there is the ability to tell us that you have a disability, and if you tell us this, we can support you and assist you. And I think approximately 8% came back out of 4,500 odd. So there were a number, and all of those were followed up, and they've actually adjusted the system now that records their personal details, so that there are categories allocated to personal records, so that we know, for example, if somebody has a mobility issue, that they need to be in a tutorial venue, that they're on the ground floor, for example. That's just a basic version. But as an organisational aspect, I can't answer that. I don't know the answer. But it is very important that we encourage all the time people to, and I'd like to think that a lot of the work that we do does encourage people to come forward.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've added in terms of the additional resources, and although it's more into in regards to the academic side, are articles that have been written around ableism in academia, and an article, a research document done by Kate Sang there. So do check them out to get kind of some elements of answers around whether this is looked at, and more in the UK and around different university. I'm kind of trying to have a look at the other, I think we had one around whether the support and the difficulties and the barriers faced by disabled staffs are different from those in other sectors. Did you want to, I mean, I have some answers for that, but did you want also to share your insight with that, Corina?
Yeah, I personally don't think they should be. If somebody has a reasonable adjustment requirement in a workplace, there shouldn't be any issues for them. However, I think in higher education in particular, for us personally, we do have a lot of remote workers, and that can be quite a challenge. Yes, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Not having worked in many sectors outside of education, I know from working within education through the whole system, from nursery level up to university level, it's not been an issue. That all the organisations I've worked for have been very supportive and very open to including disabled people and supporting them fully. But I'm imagining that for other organisations and sectors, particularly small employers, where cost is an issue, funding is an issue, and also health and safety in general in smaller businesses, very small businesses, is often overlooked, not really addressed until something goes wrong. And part of that is a misunderstanding from people of what they need to be doing, and they don't understand the rules and the regulations that support it. But also part of it is that they don't have that external expertise, or like we do in large organisations, where we have people to go to and who can give us support and information when we need it.
Yeah, and I think I would agree in the sense that it is very similar in terms of the difficulties faced and the barriers faced by disabled staff. I think the difference would be the fact that there is a difference between academic and non-academic. In some organizations, not the case in yours, but in some organizations, they would have like different policies in place because of the difference in the nature of their role. But we wouldn't see that very much into a separation between different type of staff really in private organizations. The other one, maybe actually academic somehow, could be compared to field workers. If you mentioned that people working from home at a distance, well, actually we would see organizations, private sector organizations, having field workers really around that. I think we're coming up to the end of our webinar, so I'll have to wrap up and kind of thank you very much, Corina, for joining us today. Obviously thanking Miriam as well, although she's gone, but I'll make sure I tell that again. And thank you to everybody who's attended. I apologize for not having the time to answer all the questions, but I'll make sure I reply to all of you. So thank you for attending, and I wish everybody a wonderful afternoon, although it's raining here in London. So hey, have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.